I never expected the text that ended my marriage to arrive on a Thursday afternoon. My hands trembled as I stared at my phone, the screen glaring at me with words I couldn't unsee. Ethan, I've retained Jessica Torres as my attorney. All further communication regarding our relationship must go through her office. Divorce papers will be served within 72 hours. Just like that, 8 years of shared life, of laughter and quiet moments, vanished into legal jargon and cold formality. No explanation, no discussion, no warning, only a chilling ultimatum from the man I had called my husband, the man I trusted more than anyone. I felt my heart lurch in a way I didn't know was possible. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw my phone against the wall, but another, colder part sank into the realization that this was exactly how he, and now the law, wanted it. For years, I had imagined our life as a partnership, even if Ethan provided the lion's share of our income. He had been the steady anchor while I pursued my yoga classes, my lifestyle blog, and the small joys of our home. I had always believed that love and shared commitment could bridge the gaps money sometimes created. Yet here I was, being treated like a stranger. The irony wasn't lost on me. My contributions to our life, schedulings, planning, emotional labor, holding our world together, meant nothing to him now. The words hit me harder than any betrayal could, all communication through lawyers. He wasn't rejecting my pleas, my questions, my fear. He wasn't even acknowledging the me who had loved him through late nights, travel schedules, and personal sacrifices. I had been married to a man who could suddenly become a stranger in a single, unreadable text. I remember sitting on the edge of our couch, my fingers gripping the phone as if I could force meaning out of the sterile words. Every breath felt heavier, every heartbeat louder. My mind raced with all the moments that led here, every small disagreement, every unspoken resentment, every time I told myself it didn't matter because we loved each other. And yet, love wasn't enough. Not for him, not anymore. This wasn't just a shock, it was a revelation. I realized, with a mix of fear and clarity, that the man I had married for 8 years could wield divorce like a weapon, and I had no idea how to defend myself. I first met Ethan on a rainy afternoon in a tiny coffee shop tucked between two high-rise buildings downtown. I was drenched, trying to shield my laptop bag from the relentless drizzle, and he had offered me his umbrella with a half smile that made the whole room seem warmer. We talked for hours that day, about books we loved, the kind of music that made us feel alive, and dreams we quietly nursed in the corners of our minds. By the time the rain stopped, I knew something had shifted. Something in my chest had whispered, he might be the one. Our courtship was anything but ordinary. Ethan had this effortless charm, a quiet confidence that never felt overbearing, and a kindness that seemed to flow naturally from him. We spent weekends exploring hidden corners of the city, sharing meals in hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and sometimes sitting in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken together. I had always been fiercely independent, yet with him I found a strange, tender dependence, the desire to share everything, every thought and fear, without shame. We married 5 years later, in a ceremony that felt like the perfect reflection of us, intimate, full of laughter, and surrounded by people who mattered. I wore a dress that my grandmother had once worn, and Ethan had a nervous, almost boyish grin as he slipped the ring onto my finger. It wasn't about extravagance or perfection. It was about a promise we intended to keep. In the early years, life was a balancing act. Ethan worked as a commercial airline pilot, a career he adored, but one that demanded long hours and frequent travel. I threw myself into my yoga classes and my lifestyle blog, small passions that gave me joy but hardly matched his income. Yet we managed. I handled most of the household planning, coordinated social events, and made sure our home ran smoothly while he navigated the skies. The income disparity was never an issue. It was simply how our partnership had evolved. I felt proud, even fulfilled, in my role. There were moments, of course, when friction appeared. Arguments over money, over missed phone calls, or overlooked responsibilities bubbled up, but we always talked them through, or at least I thought we did. Every time we disagreed, I reminded myself that love wasn't measured by flawless agreement, but by the willingness to return, time and again, to the same shared life. And for years, it worked. I adored Ethan, not blindly, but with a deep understanding of his strengths and flaws. He was my anchor and my adventure, my laughter, on lonely nights and my shoulder when things felt unbearable. We dreamed of traveling the world together, of building a home filled with warmth and shared memories. There was trust between us, a belief that no matter what storms came, we would face them together. And yet, beneath the surface of those years, there were tiny, almost invisible cracks, hints of tension unspoken, moments of avoidance, small disappointments brushed aside in favor of love's comfort. I never imagined those cracks could widen into a canyon, a chasm that would swallow everything we had built with words and promises alone. It started with small things, things I almost dismissed at first. Ethan's phone buzzing a little too often, a smile that didn't reach his eyes when he glanced at messages, the faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine lingering on his clothes. I told myself I was imagining it, that travel schedules and long hours could make anyone appear distant. But my intuition, the one I had learned to trust over years of navigating life's uncertainties, whispered warnings I couldn't ignore. Late one evening, I noticed Ethan's laptop left open on the dining table. Notifications flickered across the screen before he could close them, messages from a woman whose name I didn't recognize. My stomach knotted, my hands went cold, and I felt a sharp pang of betrayal even before reading the words. I didn't jump to conclusions. I wanted to believe in us, in the bond we had nurtured for nearly a decade, but a seed of doubt had been planted, fragile yet persistent. The subtle changes in his behavior became impossible to overlook. He came home later than usual, citing unexpected schedule changes, though his tone carried a defensiveness that felt out of place. I noticed the way he hesitated before answering certain calls, the way he minimized my questions with a casual shrug or a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Every small inconsistency etched itself into my mind, layering over the foundation of trust I had built so carefully. I tried to confront it gently at first, asking questions during quiet moments, watching his reactions closely. Ethan would smile, brush it off, and say, "You're imagining things. I'm just tired." But the unease didn't dissipate. My intuition screamed louder with each passing day, and I found myself watching for patterns, noting small contradictions, and silently bracing for truths I wasn't ready to face. Even our home, once a sanctuary, began to feel different. The warmth of familiar routines gave way to tension in the air, subtle silences stretching longer than comfortable. I caught myself hesitating before asking him about his day, worried about pushing him away, and yet longing for honesty that seemed increasingly out of reach. Every glance, every casual comment began to feel weighted with meaning I didn't want to uncover but could no longer ignore. One night, I stayed up past midnight, sitting on the edge of our bed, replaying conversations and interactions in my head. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears as I questioned my judgment, my memory, my own sense of reality. Was I overreacting? Was I letting fear cloud the years of love we had shared? And yet, the unease in my chest was undeniable, a heavy weight that refused to be silenced. It was then I realized that something fundamental had shifted. A barrier had begun to form between us, invisible but impenetrable, and no amount of denial or wishful thinking could dissolve it. I had glimpsed the first warning signs of a storm that would soon reshape everything I thought I knew about our life together. Thursday afternoon arrived like any other, sunlight streaming through the blinds, casting stripes across our living room. I had just finished preparing a batch of green smoothies and was setting them on the counter when my phone buzzed insistently. At first I thought it was another routine work message or a notification from my blog, but the screen made my stomach plummet. "Ethan, I've retained Jessica Torres as my attorney. All further communication regarding our relationship must go through her office. Divorce papers will be served within 72 hours. I froze. My hands, still holding the smoothie jars, began to tremble. I felt as if the floor had been ripped from under me, leaving me suspended in midair. 8 years. 8 years of love, compromises, laughter, and tears, all condensed into a few cold lines of text. There was no explanation, no plea, no acknowledgement of what we had built. Just the stark, legal reality that the man I had married could suddenly decide I was a stranger. I sank onto the kitchen stool, gripping my phone as if it were the only lifeline left in the world. The words repeated in my mind, each repetition sharper, more brutal, all further communication through her office. My throat tightened and tears blurred my vision. For a moment I wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to break something, in a display of the anger and fear surging inside me. But the deeper, more terrifying part of me felt a cold, sinking clarity. Ethan had weaponized our marriage, and I had walked straight into the trap. I remembered the subtle signs I had noticed, the late nights, the hushed phone calls, the unexplained absences. They were no longer hints. They were proof that the foundation I trusted had been hollowed out. I felt a mixture of heartbreak and betrayal that made my chest ache, my breath shallow. I had loved him, supported him, stood by him through long flights, missed dinners, and sleepless nights, yet all of it seemed to vanish in an instant. I called my best friend Mia, shaking as I explained the situation. He just sent this text. Divorce, lawyer, everything through her office. I don't even... My voice cracked, and I buried my face in my hands. Mia's voice was firm but comforting. Sophie, breathe. You're not alone. This isn't the end of your life. It's the beginning of clarity. You have to protect yourself now. Even as I listened to her, a part of me resisted, still clinging to the man I thought I knew. I remembered our wedding day, the way Ethan had smiled nervously as he slid the ring onto my finger. The promises whispered under soft candlelight. How could that man, the one who had once vowed to share his life with me, reduce our entire marriage to a legal document overnight? By evening, I had contacted my attorney, Rita Barnes, a family law expert I had trusted for years. Her calm voice over the phone was the first stability I felt since the text arrived. Sophie, she said, this sounds like someone trying to control the narrative and maintain leverage. We need to establish boundaries immediately. I felt a flicker of resolve ignite within me. This was not the time for despair, it was time for action. But even as I made plans, the emotional impact lingered. I couldn't stop replaying every conversation, every disagreement, every instance where I had prioritized our life together over my own needs. Had I missed signs? Was I too trusting? Too naive? The questions swirled endlessly, each one a sharp reminder of how quickly life could turn. How fragile even the deepest love could be. That Thursday marked the day my world split in two. On one side was the life I had shared with Ethan, filled with memories and promises. On the other was a reality where he had become a stranger, a legal adversary. And in that split, I realized that nothing would ever feel safe or certain again. My life, my marriage, and my trust had been challenged all at once, and the road ahead would demand every ounce of strength I could summon. I sat on the edge of our bed long after Ethan's text, staring at the blank wall as if it could offer answers. My mind was a storm of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. How could the man I had loved so completely reduce 8 years of marriage to a few cold sentences on a screen? Every memory, every shared laugh, every quiet night spent holding each other close now felt tainted, as though it had all been an illusion. The first night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the text in my head, the lawyer's name, the words, all further communication through her office. Each repetition tightened the knot in my chest. My hands were clammy, my stomach churned, and my heart raced as if it were trying to escape my body. I wanted to call him, to demand an explanation, to scream at him for turning our life into a battlefield, but the text forbade it. He had turned our relationship into a legal contract overnight, and I had to respect his rules no matter how cruel. I wandered through our apartment, touching objects that once brought comfort. The photo of us in the park, smiling under a canopy of autumn leaves. The mugs we had bought on our first trip together. Even the couch where we had shared countless late-night conversations felt foreign now. The familiarity that had made this place home was gone, replaced by a chilling reminder that someone I had trusted implicitly could so easily become a stranger. I called Rita, my attorney, as soon as I could, trying to inject some control into the chaos. Her voice was steady, a lifeline of reason. Sophie, you need to set boundaries immediately. If he wants all communication through legal channels, we respect that. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. This is about protecting yourself, not proving anything to him. Hearing her words, I felt a small spark of resolve ignite. The helplessness, while suffocating, was not permanent. I could act. I could protect myself. But the emotional pain didn't abate. I thought of all the times I had supported Ethan, arranging his schedule, managing our home, keeping life afloat while he pursued his demanding career. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake worrying about him, of the meals I had prepared, the plans I had adjusted for his convenience. And now, all of that seemed meaningless, erased by a single, cold text. My tears came silently, a private testament to the love and loyalty I had poured into a marriage that had been weaponized against me. I reached for my journal, hoping to untangle the emotions swirling inside me. Words poured out like a dam breaking: fear, grief, anger, disbelief. I wrote about every moment that had led to this point, every subtle warning I had ignored, every hope I had clung to. The act of writing steadied me, offered a semblance of control in a world that had been upended. By the next morning, I realized something crucial. The person I had loved for 8 years, the man I had trusted completely, had shown me exactly who he was in this moment. And in that revelation, there was clarity. I didn't need to convince him, plead with him, or understand his motives. I only needed to understand myself, to protect my life and my dignity, and to face whatever came next with strength. I drew a deep breath, my hands still trembling, but my mind slightly clearer. I would follow the legal boundaries he demanded, but I would also reclaim my agency. I would navigate the storm with my own power, with my own voice. Ethan could attempt to erase me from his life, but he could not erase the woman I had been, and the woman I would continue to be. The days that followed Ethan's text blurred into a tense haze. Every phone call from his lawyer, every email from Jessica Torres felt like a hammer striking my chest. I moved through our apartment mechanically, attending to the routines that once brought comfort, now hollow gestures. I made my own calls to Rita, meticulously documenting every interaction, mentally preparing for the financial and emotional battle ahead. But beyond the procedural necessity, there was the gnawing ache of betrayal. Ethan's face flashing in my mind, his casual dismissal, the ease with which he had turned our marriage into a legal maneuver. Then came the family involvement. Ethan's mother, Evelyn, called the day after the initial text. Her voice, though soft, carried that unmistakable tone of judgment. "Sophie, you need to understand," she began. "Ethan is under a lot of pressure. Perhaps you overreacted. It's not too late to consider reconciliation." Her words, meant to soothe, only added fuel to the fire inside me. I could hear the subtle implication: "You're the problem here." My fists tightened around the phone. "Evelyn," I said slowly, "I appreciate your concern, but communication must go through our attorneys. I will not be manipulated by guilt or judgment from anyone. Thank you for understanding." I hung up, my hands shaking, my chest tight with a mix of anger and sorrow. Not long after, my own family reached out. My younger sister, Clara Bichais, sent texts filled with worry and advice. "Sophie, maybe you should just talk to him before this escalates," one message read. Another: "It seems like he might still care. You two can work this out." Each message was a dagger, a reminder that while I was being treated as a stranger by Ethan, the world around me expected me to bridge that gap. I typed carefully, responding only once. "I will follow legal counsel. This is not negotiation, it's protection." Even as I wrote, a shiver of frustration ran through me. Why was I expected to act reasonably while he wielded the law like a weapon? The tension bled into every aspect of my daily life. Grocery trips, yoga classes, my blog work, all became exercises in endurance. I noticed the subtle shifts in my own body. My hands were constantly cold, my jaw tight, my nights punctuated by restless dreams where Ethan appeared as both the man I loved and the adversary who had shattered my sense of security. My friends tried to reach out, but I often declined, unwilling to relive the betrayal or to explain myself yet again. Then came the first financial confrontation. Rita called one afternoon, her voice calm but firm. "Sophie, you need to take immediate action on your accounts. He's likely monitoring the financial situation closely." I followed her instructions with precision, transferring funds, closing joint access points, securing my personal assets. Each step felt both empowering and sorrowful. I realized that all these years, I had trusted Ethan not just with my heart, but with the security of my life, and now I had to reclaim it piece by piece. The situation escalated further when Jessica Torres began calling relentlessly, requesting temporary support arrangements. She claimed it was humanitarian, that Sophie's life would be upended without immediate access to funds. The irony was sharp, almost cruel. Humanitarian, I thought bitterly. She was pleading for the very financial benefits that Ethan had used as leverage to assert his control. I relayed every call to Rita, who simply said, "You respond only through legal channels. Do not engage emotionally. That's exactly what they are trying to provoke." By the third week, the pressure began to crack even my resolve. I found myself pacing late at night, rereading the lawyer correspondence, trying to anticipate the next move. Every email, every phone call, every subtle comment from either family was a thread in a web of manipulation. I had to remind myself repeatedly, my goal was survival, clarity, and reclaiming my life, not validation from a man who had chosen strategy over love. One evening, after a particularly tense call from Jessica, I finally broke down. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, tears streaming freely. I whispered to myself, 8 years, gone, and all I can do is fight for what is mine. Yet in that moment of vulnerability, a flicker of something else emerged. Strength. It was in the quiet certainty that I would not allow fear or manipulation to dictate my life, that the woman who had been loyal, loving, and giving would not be erased. Later that night, Ethan called, not directly, but through the formal channels, a message forwarded by Jessica. The tone was polite, almost clinical, but the message carried a subtle weight. "We can negotiate, but only if you comply." I read it, my hands steady now, my heart fortified. I understood fully what I had to do. No emotional entanglement, no attempts to appeal to memory or sentiment, just boundaries, precision, and the reclaiming of my autonomy. The weeks dragged on, each day a test of endurance. Family pressures, legal confrontations, and emotional turbulence converged. But through it all, I felt the growing power of my own resolve. I had been forced into the role of both warrior and guardian of my life. Every choice, every measured response was an act of reclaiming agency, a declaration that I would no longer be a pawn in someone else's strategy. By the end of the month, the escalation had reached a point where nothing could remain hidden. Ethan's legal maneuvers, his mother's subtle interventions, Jessica Torres' relentless calls, they had all collided to reveal one truth. I was no longer the woman to be manipulated. And with that realization, I began to sense the first whispers of freedom, buried beneath layers of betrayal, tension, and pain. It hit me hardest one rainy evening, the kind of rain that blurs the city lights and makes the streets reflective pools of solitude. I sat alone in our apartment, the space that had once been filled with laughter and warmth, now suffocating in its emptiness. My journal lay open, pen abandoned, my thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. I felt untethered, suspended between the life I had loved and the stark reality of the life that had been ripped from me. I kept replaying Ethan's words over and over, each repetition a dagger. All further communication through her office. Divorce papers to be served within 72 hours. No conversation, no explanation, no recognition of 8 years shared. My hands shook as I touched the photo frames, the small mementos that now felt like relics from someone else's life. I wondered if I had ever truly known him. If all our shared dreams were simply illusions crafted by a man who could pivot from husband to adversary in a single moment. Tears came unbidden, hot and relentless. I thought of my mornings spent preparing breakfast for him, my evenings juggling yoga classes and blog posts, while ensuring our home ran smoothly. All the ways I had contributed, all the sacrifices I had made, did they matter at all? The reality that he had weaponized our marriage, that he had turned our shared life into a negotiation tool, crushed me. I felt both rage and an aching sadness, the kind that settles in your bones and refuses to leave. I couldn't reach him. I couldn't speak my truth, couldn't confront him without breaking the rules he had set, the very rules that stripped me of intimacy and dialogue. I was forced into silence, trapped in a cage constructed not of bars, but of cold legalese and deliberate detachment. I felt invisible, my emotions disregarded, my love dismissed. It was as if the person I had been for him, supportive, loyal, trusting, had evaporated overnight. The isolation was suffocating. Friends offered advice, family urged caution, but their voices felt distant echoes. I was alone with my grief, my betrayal, and the daunting responsibility of navigating the chaos Ethan had orchestrated. I found myself pacing our apartment late into the night, gripping my head in my hands, whispering to the shadows, "Why? Why like this?" The anger and despair mingled, an unrelenting storm that left me gasping for breath. Financial uncertainty loomed as well. Although Rita had guided me through immediate boundaries, the reality of being cut off from the resources I had once shared with Ethan struck fear into my heart. The apartment felt less like home and more like a gilded cage I couldn't afford to escape. The independence I had cultivated through yoga and my blog suddenly seemed inadequate against the weight of 8 years of financial interdependence. I remember looking out the rain-streaked window and feeling a profound sense of loss, not just for the marriage, but for the person I had been within it. Sophie, who trusted, who gave without reservation, who believed in partnership and shared dreams. She was fractured now, uncertain if she could ever trust again, uncertain if love would ever feel safe or genuine. The betrayal was so total, so encompassing, that it felt like my very identity had been stripped away, along with the life we had built together. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine life without him, not the legal life, but the emotional one, and it terrified me. I feared loneliness, the loss of shared memories, the sudden weight of responsibility that now rested entirely on me. My chest ached, my mind spun, and I wondered if I had the strength to face what lay ahead. Yet even in that darkness, a spark remained, faint but insistent. Somewhere beneath the grief and anger, a whisper of resilience called out, "You are not nothing. You are not powerless." It was this faint ember that would, in time, ignite into determination. But in that moment, I let myself sit with the full scope of the pain. I let the tears flow, the sobs shake my body, and the heartache settle. It was the lowest I had ever been, the moment before the storm begins to shift, the point where true strength is forged in the fire of despair. The morning after the darkest night, something shifted inside me. I woke with a clarity that surprised me, a sharp, undeniable sense of purpose. The grief was still there, the ache of betrayal lingering, but it was tempered now by resolve. I realized that Ethan had shown me exactly who he was, not the man I had loved, but someone who saw marriage as a tool, a power dynamic to be manipulated. And with that realization came something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. Rita called with updates on the legal front. As she outlined the steps for asset protection and the next phase of divorce proceedings, I felt the weight of my own agency returning. Each action I took, transferring funds, enforcing financial boundaries, documenting correspondence, was a reclaiming of the life I had almost lost. For the first time, I wasn't reacting out of fear or desperation. I was acting deliberately, strategically, and with the knowledge that every move was mine, not dictated by Ethan's whims. Then, the truth about his strategy became undeniable. Through Jessica Torres' frantic calls and the information Rita pieced together, it was clear that Ethan, and his circle, had believed I would crumble under the pressure, that the shock of his cold, legal ultimatum would force me into compliance. But I hadn't. I had endured the emotional assault, the isolation, the judgment from both families, and yet here I was, standing firm. Their calculations, predicated on fear and manipulation, had failed spectacularly. When I confronted this reality, a wave of empowerment surged through me. I understood now that the leverage Ethan thought he held was an illusion. By demanding all communication go through attorneys, by weaponizing finances and family pressure, he had revealed his hand. And I had seen it. I had responded not with panic, but with precision, not with desperation, but with strategy. And in that response, I found my power. For the first time in weeks, I looked at Ethan not with longing, not with heartbreak, but with clarity. He was a man who had chosen strategy over love, leverage over partnership, and I was no longer bound by the expectations of a marriage he had defined as a transaction. I could see the outlines of my own future, shaped not by fear or manipulation, but by choice, integrity, and self-respect. The confrontation with reality also extended to my emotions. I acknowledged the pain, the betrayal, the grief, but I refused to let them dictate my actions. Tears still came, but now they were accompanied by a sense of righteous indignation, a burning knowledge that I would not allow my life to be hijacked. Every document filed, every boundary enforced, every call meticulously handled through legal channels became an assertion of my autonomy. I spoke with Rita again, this time not as a victim seeking guidance, but as a woman commanding the narrative. "Let's proceed," I said firmly. "Every step we take, we do on my terms. I am not asking, I am instructing." The shift in my voice, the certainty behind it, was a revelation even to me. For the first time since the text arrived, I felt untouchable, not because I was free from the pain, but because I had taken ownership of it. That day marked the turning point. The storm of betrayal, isolation, and manipulation had not broken me. It had forged me into someone stronger, more aware, and more capable of navigating both the legal and emotional battles ahead. I was no longer at the mercy of Ethan's strategies or his family's judgment. I had reclaimed my voice, my boundaries, and my power. Standing by the window that evening, watching the city lights shimmer on wet streets, I felt a sense of equilibrium returning. The darkness of the past week still lingered at the edges of my vision, but it no longer dominated me. I was Sophie, resilient, resolute, and finally in control of the life that was always mine, waiting to be lived on my terms. The divorce papers arrived one crisp morning, delivered with the cold formality that had become all too familiar. I held them in my hands, the reality of the past weeks crystallized on stark, printed pages. 8 years of marriage distilled into legal jargon, asset divisions, and financial boundaries. But unlike before, I felt no panic, no desperation, only clarity. I was ready. Ethan's response, or rather the absence of it, was telling. Jessica Torres called, flustered, trying to negotiate last-minute adjustments, but I had already instructed Rita to enforce the settlement as structured. Every call she made, every appeal to humanitarian reasons, met with the same response. Sophie had defined the terms, and the law supported her. The leverage Ethan thought he held had evaporated. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The financial settlement was meticulous. I retained my independence, keeping my personal savings, my assets, and control over our shared home. Ethan received minimal concessions, just enough to satisfy the legal requirements, but nowhere near the influence or control he had attempted to wield over my life. It was a subtle but powerful victory, not about revenge, but about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. As the weeks passed, the social fallout rippled outward. Ethan's mother, Evelyn, who had subtly attempted to manipulate the situation, began to withdraw. Her calls became infrequent, her tone cautious, as if realizing that the woman she had once tried to control was untouchable now. Even his sister, who had tried to mediate behind the scenes, had no choice but to respect the boundaries I had set. Family pressure, once a constant weight, had dissipated. Friends and colleagues noticed the change in me. Where once I had moved cautiously, burdened by grief and manipulation, I now carried a quiet confidence. I returned to teaching yoga and managing my lifestyle blog with renewed energy, fully aware that my worth, my security, and my life were no longer tethered to Ethan's approval or control. I had endured the worst of emotional betrayal and emerged stronger, more self-aware, and entirely independent. I even began to notice the subtle shifts in Ethan himself. Through legal channels, he attempted to negotiate minor concessions, but the firmness of my stance left him frustrated. The man who had thought he could manipulate, coerce, and control through strategy and intimidation was now faced with a woman who would not bend, who would not compromise her dignity or her life for someone who had weaponized her love. Financial freedom brought its own revelations. With the house under my control and my monthly expenses reduced dramatically, I experienced a sense of relief I hadn't realized I was missing. No more wondering if bills would be manageable, no more budgeting around someone else's impulses. I felt lighter, more capable, and free to live according to my own choices and standards. Even social interactions reflected the shift. I could finally engage with friends and family without the looming shadow of judgment or expectation. I could make plans, pursue personal growth, and invest in relationships that were reciprocal, not transactional. The fallout, while initially painful, had cleared away the illusions that had bound me to a life defined by manipulation. By the third month, the divorce was finalized. Rita had orchestrated a settlement that ensured not only financial security but emotional closure. Ethan had received exactly what the law required, and no more. I had reclaimed my autonomy, my dignity, and my sense of self. And in that reclamation, I discovered something profound. The person I had been, the one who had loved deeply and given generously, had not been diminished. She had been strengthened, tempered by the trials, and ultimately victorious. The experience also reshaped my understanding of trust and partnership. I realized that true relationships are built on mutual respect, transparency, and shared responsibility, not fear, manipulation, or power plays. Ethan's strategy had failed because it relied on coercion and expectation rather than love and mutual respect. In contrast, my response had succeeded because it was rooted in integrity, self-respect, and unwavering adherence to my values. Even now, months later, the memory of those dark weeks remains. I remember the panic, the despair, the loneliness, but I also remember the moment I found my strength, the moment I took back my life. The fallout was severe for Ethan, yes, but it was also a profound awakening for me. I had survived, reclaimed, and learned, and that, ultimately, was the true victory. In the quiet aftermath, I finally exhaled. The storm had passed, leaving me with space to breathe, reflect, and heal. The apartment that once held tension and betrayal now felt like a sanctuary. Each item, each corner, was a reminder not of what I had lost, but of what I had survived and reclaimed. I was no longer defined by a marriage manipulated through fear and legal maneuvering. I was defined by my resilience, my courage, and my unwavering integrity. The lessons were clear and etched deep into my consciousness. Trust is precious, not to be given blindly, and boundaries are essential, even, and especially, with those you love. Love cannot be measured by compliance, nor can devotion be leveraged as a weapon. True partnership requires respect, transparency, and equality. And most importantly, one's self-worth must never be contingent on another's willingness to honor it. I also learned that empowerment often comes in the quiet, resolute moments, the choices we make when no one is watching, when the world seems darkest, and when we must stand alone. It's in these moments that character is forged, that independence is realized, and that strength becomes unmistakably our own. Months after the divorce, I began to reclaim the joys I had once taken for granted. Yoga classes felt liberating again. My blog became a space of creativity and self-expression, and friendships deepened, grounded in mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. The lessons of the past 8 years remained, but they no longer controlled me. I moved forward with clarity, confidence, and a renewed sense of purpose. Ethan faded into the background of my life, no longer a source of power or fear. The legal victory, while significant, was secondary to the profound personal awakening I had experienced. I had discovered what it meant to be both strong and compassionate, independent and grounded, capable of loving and yet unshakably self-reliant. In the end, the greatest lesson wasn't about him, or the marriage, or the betrayal. It was about me, Sophie. About the woman who survived manipulation, reclaimed her life, and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the future on her own terms. And for anyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or manipulated, I hope my story serves as proof. The power to reclaim your life is always within your reach.